So good morning.
Good morning.
It's been a while, a few weeks. Most of you know I've been in seminary at Meadville, Lombard for 2 intensive weeks, as well as lots of studying outside of those 2 weeks in class. And so I'm back, and I just wanted to say I'm really glad to be here. It's good to see all familiar faces as well as lots of new faces, and that's exciting. So I entitled this sermon, "That Prophetic Calling Will Break Your Heart." And I find, and I'm glad to hear that the children's education program has already addressed this, that sometimes you wonder what we mean by that word prophet. Because there's a stereotype or a trope in society that a prophet is somebody who predicts the future. But if we think back to the first biblical prophet, Moses, he didn't necessarily predict the future. He told Pharaoh how it was going to be. My dad, a Pentecostal preacher, used to describe the difference there as your foretelling or your forthtelling. Telling people how it's going to be. And so, and Chris did a great job in his story of lifting up women who told how it was going to be, how things were going to change, that the existing way of doing it, the status quo, cannot stand and needs to give way to a new reality. And so this is the element of prophetic calling that I'm going to lift up. Now, when we think of prophetic calling, there's another image that may come in your mind, and that's of the angry young man screaming and shouting. Everything needs to change, you're doing it all wrong. Some people knew me back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I was one of those angry young men telling everybody I could they were doing it all wrong. That anger comes from immaturity. It comes from not dealing with my stuff in different ways, and deflecting and putting it all out there that the world is messed up and you need to fix it because I want to feel better. A pretty good example of a angry young prophet is Amos, also in the Hebrew scripture. And he says, I'm going to read from chapter 5. And you tell me if this doesn't speak something you yourself have felt lately. O evil men, you make justice a bitter pill for the poor and oppressed. Righteousness and fair play are meaningless fictions to you. How you hate honest judges, how you despise people who tell the truth. You trample the poor and steal their smallest crumb by all your taxes, fines, and usury. I've had some of those feelings recently. I bet you have too. In fact, the Women's March was a very good example of speaking truth to power and saying, yeah, you think you run this country, but guess what? Guess what? And I just want to say, just a little parenthetical, is that, yes, the order stayed deportations, but my understanding is there are still people in detention. Yeah. There's still work to do, and of course, the executive order is still there, and who knows, right? So the fight for immigrant rights, which is just one of the basics things we got to fight, by a long list, and I know everybody here has their personal calling, their prophetic calling, as you will, if you will, to stand against whatever justice you are invested in working at, because we're all different. We all have talents that are different and interests. So I commend everyone to embrace their call, their challenge to the status quo, to the injustices. And I said this sermon is that prophetic calling will break your heart. I came up with that many years ago in a blog post where some people in the Quaker denomination that I was at, some young adults, were going around preaching about prophetic calling to different congregations, and it sounded to me a lot like the, I'm angry, you're all doing it wrong, and I want to feel better, so change. And I said, what's missing here? Because we all want things to change, and yes, we all do want to feel better, but I just felt like it was not connected. And I remembered back to my experience of the angry young man prophet who was denouncing anything and everything and saying, you're all doing it wrong, you need to change. And I realized they weren't listening to me. They were tuning me out, in part because of the anger that was wrapped up in and the immaturity it was wrapped up in. And it struck me in this one of these moments where you, like, your whole life appears in you in the past and you say, I've been doing it all wrong. Sets you back. Makes you refigure, rethink. How, and you don't give up your sense that things are wrong and they need to change, but you begin to realize, I need a new strategy. I need to do something different. And this is what I call the break your heart moment. Because underneath the anger at the injustices is sorrow and mourning and grief at the immense suffering in the world. And that is harder to deal with. That is harder to feel. That is harder to hang on to. Thich Nhat Hanh, I believe, and I apologize if it's wrong, it may be the Dalai Lama, says that anger is like a hot coal. If you hang on to it too tight, it burns only you. And that's what happens with anger, runs your prophetic calling. And I am saying that we can go further. And the way to go further, the way to move into an effective prophetic voice, an effective calling out of injustice, is by staying attuned to the mourning, the grief, the suffering that has triggered the anger. And speaking out that prophetic calling in compassion, in reaching for partnership, reaching for collaboration, rather than just, you're all doing it wrong. One of my favorite examples of a prophet who changed in ways that were so dramatic is Malcolm X. We've all heard the Malcolm X speeches. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock landed on us. Speaking of the African American people. And he spoke real truth to a real world, but he also had enwrapped it in a certain anger that closed the ears of white folks. And some white folks who would have been allies. And I'm not saying he was doing anything wrong. I mean, it was real. It came from real stuff. But late in his life, after he'd broken with the Nation of Islam, he went to Mecca. And I recently read the autobiography of Malcolm X, where he talks about Mecca. And I recommend, if you haven't read it, or if it's been a long time, go back and reread it. He tells about how, as he's trying to get to Mecca, there's all these barriers thrown up because, one, he's black. And there tend not to be a lot of black people going to Mecca in the 60s. And two, he's an American. And that just had maybe never happened, or not happened in a long time. And so he was being blocked at every attempt to get to Mecca. And then he remembered that the man who had written the letter, so he had to actually get a letter to go to Mecca from a prominent Muslim leader, and he realized that he'd forgotten to give them the name and phone number of a contact in Mecca who would help him out. And so he finally gave that number to the people who were detaining him and said, call this guy, he'll vouch for me. And he finally was able to go to Mecca. And he describes, so it turns out this fellow was white. And Malcolm describes, as he's taken away from this cell to a fancy hotel suite that had been rented by this gentleman, and I forget his name, I apologize, and that gentleman went back to his own house and let Malcolm X stay in this very nice suite. And he describes it this way. I'm going to read from the autobiography. Throughout my travels in the Muslim world, I have met, talked to, and even eaten with people who in America would have been considered white. But the white attitude was removed from their minds by the religion of Islam. I have never before seen sincere and true brotherhood practiced by all colors together, irrespective of their color. And you may be shocked by these words coming from me, but on this pilgrimage, what I have seen and experienced has forced me to rearrange much of my thought patterns previously held and to toss aside some of my previous conclusions. During the last 11 days here in the Muslim world, I've eaten from the same plate, drunk from the same glass, slept in the same bed or on the same rug while praying to the same God, with fellow Muslims whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And in the words and actions, in the deeds of the white Muslims, I felt the same sincerity that I felt among black African Muslims of Nigeria, Sudan, and Ghana. So, I love that story because I think it illustrates what I'm trying to describe. It's something that's almost you can't describe in words. When your focus shifts from focusing on the anger to focusing on the compassion, the mourning, the suffering, and how that informs and shapes your decisions and your leading as a prophetic person, however that's called to be. James Luther Adams is one of the Unitarian Universalists, actually I think Unitarian theologians, in the first half of the 20th century. And he said, well, the Protestants taught the doctrine of the priesthood of all believers, but you Unitarians preach the prophethood of all believers. So guess what? Are you Unitarian? Universalist? Yes. Guess what? You're a prophet. I'm going to tell a little bit more about my story of how I moved from the anger to the compassion and grief to the broken heart. Again, being raised Pentecostal, you're taught that certain actions could condemn you to hell. Swear words were high on the list, and I had trouble with those as a teen. Sinful thoughts. I won't detail what those could be about, but they were something, even a sinful thought, it was told, if I hadn't repented of it, it's going to go to hell. And so I grew up with that paranoid morality, that immature morality, constantly afraid of my actions. And so when I got older and began this prophetic period, a lot of it was driven by this fear and this anger. This anger that, one, there was a God who might send me to hell, and I don't think I deserved it, but the other was this fear that God might be real. And what changed me wasn't becoming Unitarian Universalist and stop believing in hell. That was later. But there was a Christian minister, a man by the name of Jim Wallace, who was the founder of Sojourners Magazine and Sojourners Community in Washington, D.C. And he had been raised a fundamentalist. He had been taught this idea that sinful thoughts and swear words unrepented could send you to hell. And he walked away from it. When he hit college and University of Michigan, I believe it was Ann Arbor, he became involved with the student radicals in the 60s, the Students for a Democratic Society, became basically a Marxist, radical, angry young man, right? And at some point, though, he came back to faith. And in his memoir, he describes the Bible passage that transformed his heart. And I'm going to read just an excerpt. It's from Matthew 25. You may be familiar with this one. It starts in verse 31. The Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, and he sits on his glorious throne, and all the nations are gathered, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates sheep from the goats, and he puts the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And to those on his right, he says, "Come, you are blessed by my Abba, Heavenly Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, you came to visit me. And the righteous answer, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty, give you something to drink? See you a stranger, invite you in, needing clothes, and clothe you, sick or in prison, and visit you. And he said, whatever you have done to the least of these, you have done to me. Now that passage goes on to tell the same kind of thing with the goats, except they don't get into the eternal reward, they get into the eternal punishment. And what Reverend Jim Wallace pointed out in his memoirs is that he had never really known what was important to Jesus was these sorts of things. He thought it was swear words and stuff lots. And for me, this was one of those passages, at the same time as like my angry prophetic vision got broken down by realizing I was doing it all wrong because I was alienating people. When I began to change my priorities and realize, telling people they're wrong about this and that isn't necessarily a good thing, that what I should care about is real human people, real human suffering. And that set me off on a path that eventually did actually lead me to Universalism first and then Unitarian Universalism. So I'm going to read a poem about prophetic vision by Mari Evans. And I just want us to let these words speak to us about the prophetic element of Unitarian Universalist faith. Speak the truth to the people. Talk sense to the people. Free them with honesty. Free the people with love and courage for their being. Spare them the fantasy. Fantasy enslaves. A slave is enslaved, can be unenslaved by, can be enslaved by unwisdom. Can be re-enslaved while in flight from the enemy. Can be enslaved by his brother whom he loves. His brother whom he trusts, whom he loves. Speak the truth to the people. It is not necessary to green the heart only to identify the enemy. It is not necessary to green the heart only to... It is not necessary to green the heart only to identify the enemy. It is not necessary to blow the mind only to free the mind. To identify the enemy is to free the mind. A free mind has no need to scream. A free mind is ready for other things. For me, the prophetic calling of Unitarian Universalism is stated in one of our principles. It says, we are dedicated to a world with peace, justice, and equity for all persons. And I want to just call us, and actually, let me say that y'all are teaching me about social justice ministry here, what it's like to be in a congregation where almost any of you, I could just have a random conversation and you would tell me what you're interested in, what your causes and issues are. And that, to me, I've been in several different churches and I've never experienced that sort of widespread commitment to social justice. So in a sense, I'm almost preaching to the choir. And, you know, I'm not saying any of you have anger issues. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But so I'm going to invite you to reflect on that. And we're going to sing in a few moments here. We're going to sing number 108. My Life Goes On, an Endless Song, which is one of my favorite. I think it's a very prophetic sounding song. 108. So let's just jump right into that. We're going to sing, it's just 3 verses, so